Hello, welcome to the programme. It's been planned and talked about for months. And in the past few hours, Ukraine says its long-awaited offensive on the southern front has finally begun. A Ukrainian military spokesperson said its army had now broken through the first line of Russian defences around the main city of Kherson, the first part of Kyiv's ultimate goal of retaking the region. There are also reported to be offensives in other directions. Well, Ukraine says recent strikes on Russia's southern logistical routes had weakened the enemy and, according to its southern command, fighters from the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic had retreated from their positions, with Russian paratroopers who'd been supporting them abandoning their posts as well. Let's go live to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and speak to the BBC's Ugo Bashega. Ugo, there's been stalemate in this area for the last few months. Much has been talked about this counter-offensive. Is it the right time for them to go now in terms of weaponry?
Well, for weeks we've been talking about the possibility of the Ukrainians launching this counter-offensive to retake Kherson, also because for weeks they've been targeting Russian supply lines, infrastructure, away from the front lines, deep inside Russian-controlled territory. And this has been possible only because of the very sophisticated weapons that have been supplied by the West. So lots of questions remain whether the Ukrainians have the capacity to go ahead with a major counter-offensive, but it seems that we're seeing perhaps the beginning of this major offensive. There are reports of intense fighting in parts of the south, also that Ukrainian forces have managed to break through the first line of Russian defense around the city, reports that electricity has been cut off there in the city as well. Now, Kherson has been under Russian occupation from the very beginning of the war. It's been one of the it was one of the first cities that the Russians managed to capture at the beginning of the war, and it is one of the largest Ukrainian cities in Russian control.
Presumably the Russian forces are well dug in, though. They've been there such a long time, and the landscape is difficult as well, isn't it? The geography, it's flat, it's agricultural, for the Ukrainians to try and retake that area.
Absolutely, and for weeks we've been seeing the Ukrainians attacking those areas, but we've also seen reports of the Russians sending troops and reinforcements to those positions in the Kherson region. So presumably the Russians will be fighting to keep this region under their control. But also the Ukrainians have attacked the bridges over the Dnipro River that have been used by the Russians to reinforce, to supply their position. So it is, it seems, a very complicated situation for the Russian troops stationed there.
We're going to come to the Zaporizhzhia power plant in a minute, Ugo. So let's just save our conversation for the fight for Kherson as well, because presumably a very difficult decision now for President Zelensky, whether to throw troops with high casualties potentially in the Kherson, or let this drift, this stalemate, for the next few months and into the winter, when Western allies will be stretched in terms of their commitment potentially to this war and the cost it's going to mean to them.
Absolutely, and for many weeks we haven't seen any kind of major shift in terms of positions on the ground, and it seems that the conflict is at a deadlock, with neither the Russians or the Ukrainians being able to make any kind of significant gain. Well, that could be changing now if the Ukrainians are indeed going ahead with a major counter-offensive. But last week, as we marked half a year since the beginning of this invasion, Independence Day as well here in Ukraine, there was a big question here for the Ukrainians, and that was about the Western support. Many people questioning whether Western countries in particular, when people are now concerned about the rising cost of living, with energy bills, with rising food prices, whether the support that Ukraine has seen from Western countries would continue. So now the Ukrainians seem to be going ahead with this major counter-offensive, again with the weapons that they've been receiving from the West, and not only in terms of the support that they have been receiving from the West, but they've also been telling Western countries to keep this kind of help, not only in terms of humanitarian assistance, but also the weapons coming to this country.
Okay. Ugo Bashega, thank you very much indeed. Ugo there in Kyiv.